Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing.
Mark Stevens. Sorry.
Hi, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Just doing great. How are you, Molly?
I'm doing great too. I'm so excited to have you back on the show and talk about your new book. So, can you tell me a little bit about the plot for this new one?
Sure. It's kind of a somewhat simple setup. It's a story about a retired serial killer in the city of Denver, and he's a guy who has gotten away with what he did years and years ago. And it's also about a television reporter who makes a mistake one day in the middle of a big news scene and kind of takes things into her own hands in a way that she should not have done. And she gets suspended by her station. And so she's sort of an outcast, suspended, temporarily by her station. She's an outcast. And what happens, what kicks off the book, what gets the story going is a new victim turns up years and years later. A new victim turns up exactly in the same manner as the serial killer used to kill, and our retired and sort of guy who thinks he's free and clear begins to worry immediately that he knows he did not commit this new crime and he needs to clear his name, so to speak. So he reaches out to the suspended reporter and works with her to help her get his name back. So it's sort of a case of mutual redemption. He helps her get her reputation and job back, and she helps him get his reputation back in a way too. Of course, that leads to the question of actually who is this guy, and the chase is on.
Oh, that is so fantastic. And I love that it's got elements of that like copycat killer kind of story to it, as well as the mutual redemption. Where did the idea for this one come from?
Well, this is one of those strange things. The idea came to me in a middle. I was driving on a highway. I had written three books. This is years ago. The journey to publication for this book was quite a long saga, but I had already written three books. I hadn't been published. I'd had good agents. I loved the writing process. I'd loved putting those three books together. I'd gotten close, I thought, to a good deal with through all these New York agents, all good agents that still are around today. And I wasn't even necessarily trying to think of what I was going to write next. I was just driving on the highway at night. I was by myself. And I can tell you this whole idea fell into my lap. It just came out of the blue. I don't even know what that expression means. It just was there, wholly formed in my head. And yeah, it wasn't super detailed, but it was the general kind of structure and idea of the story. And I'm not a kind of a woo-woo kind of guy. I don't necessarily, but it's clear that to me, looking back, that my kind of writer unconsciousness or my writer consciousness, whatever, was working on something. And all of a sudden it just surfaced. So unlike other books that I've written, this wasn't prompted by reading an article or meeting somebody or anything like that. This idea just kind of came to me and I started working on it.
Oh, that is so cool. I've had a lot of authors on the show say similar things, usually more about character and stuff, and it's always the best moments and the best books that come from those. When you were
Yeah.
writing the book, what did you do to kind of, did you feel like you had to kind of stay true to that initial idea, or were there things that you did that kind of took you away from that, or how did that work for you?
Wow. Well, remarkably, the general construct of the book really has stayed intact from that first initial idea right through to the end. And I've got to say, it's probably one of the few books that has, you know, sort of stuck with the initial idea, not gotten off track or detoured. Uh, so I'm pretty proud of that. Of course, all the 8.5 million decisions you make about building characters and all the little plot points about, just how this is actually going to unfold, and in particular, who is behind this new case, this new victim, who is the new perpetrator, um, who is causing this trouble for our retired antagonist. So just coming up with all the backstory was where the creativity, I guess, went into kind of putting meat on the bones of the general idea.
Now, when you started, did you know that ending? Or did you outline it all to try and figure that out? Or is that something you
Mm,
discover?
yeah, I'm very much a seat of the pants writer. Um, and so the process of understanding what was behind that was very much a organic kind of a process of just discovery.
Oh, that is so interesting to hear. So, is this process different for this book than it has been for your other books?
Um, well, the first draft was of this book was written, as I said, quite a few years ago, and that was back when I had sort of I used to write by hand, and I still write occasionally by hand, but that was about the only change I've made. Um, I have switched from writing by hand, which I was very proud of for a long time. And now, lately, with some of the deadlines, I've been fortunate to have some good contracts come along, and I've just found that in order to speed up, I had to switch over to writing on the laptop. But one thing hasn't changed at all, and that is that I'm an early morning writer. I've been doing it for 40 years. It's, 5 o'clock in the morning till about 7 o'clock in the morning every morning. Weekends too. Vacations. I love vacations to get up early, just keep writing, keep writing. So that general time frame and just, commitment to trying to put some words on the page every day is still there. I don't, beat myself up too hard if I miss a day here and there, but in general, that's what I live for is getting up and seeing how the story is moving.
Oh, absolutely. So, with that kind of in mind, how did you start writing?
Back in just at the very beginning.
Yeah, yeah, I'd like to hear at the very
Yeah.
beginning.
Well, I what I did was I shook off all my fears, and just kind of decided that I would go for it. I don't know exactly. I can sort of see those moments. I can see um, the actual situation I was in when I started, and I, um, had an idea based on reading a newspaper column at the time, the newspaper column that informed my first book. And at the time, I was actually doing a lot of traveling. I was a reporter, and actually, I was a television news producer, and I was doing a lot of flying around the country. This is back in the '80s, so a long time ago, and it'll will age me instantly. But I was sitting in an airplane by myself, and I could pull out a notebook and just start jotting down ideas and start jotting down scenes and seeing if I could put something together that um, hung together that felt like it was an opening chapter. It felt like it was an opening scene. And that was, I mean, I guess because I was flying and I was sort of, in back in the '80s, you could kind of put on your cassette player, headset, or whatever, and it was a little more comfortable up in the air and generally had a little more leg room, and I could just kind of quietly write. And I don't even think I really told anybody I was starting. I just wanted to see if I could put some words on a page that created a scene because I loved reading so much. I just wanted to see what that process was like.
I think the idea of writing while traveling and while on vacation, but especially like during the act of like flying or in a car or on a train or anything like that, I know that that's how I prefer to write, and I feel like that's something. There's something not to get too woo-woo with it, but it kind of gets you into that headspace there to write and to really get in the mindset of these other characters.
Right. I love having people around, coffee shops, just inspiration with people around. I do write every morning at a very quiet dining room table now, and 90% of the time it is at that quiet dining room table, but it's stimulating to be out and about and to see people, realize how different we all are, and maybe pick up a image or some sort of who knows what that will inspire you. I like the hubbub.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Kind of going back to the what you were saying earlier about writing by hand, I'd like to hear a little bit more about how that was for you, and now that you do write on the computer, like how that's changed your process at all.
Well, I don't think it's really changed in terms of how I think about putting the scene together, but I love the simplicity of getting up with a pen and paper. And by one advantage of that, of course, is no distractions. You can't open up email, you can't open up Facebook or any of the social media. You just simply have a notebook waiting for you and the pen. And as long as you leave your phone in the kitchen and go into your dining room and just start writing and give yourself 2 hours to do that, there's no distraction. So that's one big advantage. And I also think just something about not having the electronic aspect there and having the light and all that, just being with the ink in the page and even hearing, it sounds kind of crazy, but hearing the scratch on a paper was it felt rewarding to me to see that come together and to go back and just slash through a page that wasn't good or and just rewrite it on the spot. It's very immediate, which I think is, I don't know, there's something satisfying about that. People should try it at least once.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'd like to know a little bit more. So writing something like this, especially a mystery, I imagine there's a lot of research that goes into that. Was there for you, and what did that look like?
Well, in the case of No Lie Lasts Forever, because I had been a television producer in the 80s, and when I wrote this book was mostly 20 years later, and then I had to update it more recently. And the technology had changed so much with television news production. Um, so I had to go back and I contacted a reporter in Denver, a television reporter, a friend of mine, not a close friend, but somebody I had enough, familiarity with to reach out to her and say, "Hey, could I shadow you for a day?" And just be part of the whole day. Go to the morning news meeting, watch her videographer put equipment together, load the car or the van or the truck, go out and cover a couple of different stories, watch her do a stand up. That part where the reporter's out in the field reporting live from the scene, and just, interviewing different people around the news station, kind of watching the flow, getting the television news production details right was very important to me, as it was to my agent, who years later, when he read the book, and he could see that even in the intervening time between those first drafts and when he started representing me and that book, he said, "Can you go back one more time and make sure all this is updated?" And again, the technology had changed.
Mhm.
So, just trying to get the veracity right around her job in particular, was really important to me. And, I didn't want to give readers any chance to think that I hadn't done my homework.
Absolutely. And what about the crime element to it? Is that something that you look to, like true crime or other novels of the same vein?
Oh, when I'm in vacuuming mode, when I'm trying to absorb as much as I can into my writing, I am in full download mode. True crime podcasts, watching true crime documentaries, reading true crime books, reading about serial killers, reading excellent novels about serial killers. Um, I really, just try to fill my brain up with all that dark stuff. Um, and and I really do, I'm voracious, I guess, and I'm also really open to just anything that comes my way and set Google alerts for all sorts of different weird phrases around bizarre murders and bizarre crimes and serial killer updates and things like that. Ask friends about what they listen to in terms of true crime and just try to get tips and ideas. So yeah, I when I'm researching anything, I'm trying to absorb that world and live in it as much as possible. Yeah.
Interesting. So I'd love to know more about what made you want to write a mystery specifically. And I know you also have a mystery series as well. But is it something that you like to read, or what brought you into that?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up the son of two librarians. Grew up in a house full of books. Both my folks were very into. They both had their masters in library science. They're very much into information processing and understanding information, sort of on a heady level. But they were both big readers, and I grew up in a world of books, and I pretty much read general fiction as a kid, even though I loved it. And then in the early 80s, as a newspaper reporter in Denver, a friend handed me my first mystery. And I'd always kind of not looked down on mysteries, I just didn't know them. And I didn't realize how great the writing could be. And I quickly found people like James M. Cain and Patricia Highsmith, Ross MacDonald, Elmore Leonard, and was just transfixed. I really liked the idea with mysteries of a beginning, a middle, and an end, everything just really having that tight end. And I just, being somebody who wants to know how hard something is to do, I said, let me see if I can put something together. And I just spotted a column in the Rocky Mountain News. It was actually a syndicated column out of a Chicago newspaper by Mike Royko, a classic Chicago veteran, well-known journalist, Mike Royko. And it was probably 600 words. It was really short, but it was a beginning, middle, and end of a really interesting story. And I thought, there's the basis of a plot. And I started writing. And I found that I liked the whole process of just seeing how my imagination would add information to the rough outline that was in that column. Um, so I don't know. I mean, I, at that point, I wanted to know everything about the business and how to get published. And it would be 23 years until I would get published, but I just kept at it.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
mysteries I do I love mysteries. I've interviewed countless mystery authors on this show that are all so amazing. And it's a genre that I feel like can kind of be overlooked, but when you do start reading them, you kind of are, at least I was hit with how incredibly hard these are to write because they do have that beginning, middle, end structure to it, but you have to keep it, you're on the edge of your seat the whole time. You have to make something that the person can't guess, but that they could kind of guess. And there's a lot of different elements at play there for sure.
Yeah, you have to play fair with the reader. You have to give them enough information that they can play along with your protagonist and try to figure out what's going on. You can't be bringing in curveballs at the end and not be seen as a deceitful author. And you also have to feel like you can bring something fresh to it because there have been tens of thousands and tens of thousands of mysteries written. So what is your fresh idea that you're bringing to the genre?
Definitely. Can you tell me a little bit more about you as a reader? What sort of books you like to read? What you're currently reading?
Oh boy. Well, I'm currently reading a great nonfiction book about the fate of Lake Powell called Life After Deadpool by Zach Podmore. And Lake Powell's a giant reservoir in southwest Utah, built by or created by the construction of the Glen Canyon Dam. And so I'm a big, I love reading nonfiction, environmental nonfiction in particular. I just read a great mystery out of California, a guy named David Freed, who was a former reporter friend of mine who went on to the LA Times. And he's got a series out there about a pilot. And the latest book in the series is called Deep Fury. And it's absolutely excellent, top notch. I just recently read James by Percival Everett, which everybody in the country is apparently reading. Percival Everett, the same guy who wrote Erasure, which became a great movie last year, American Fiction. Um, Percival Everett is just a brilliant, brilliant writer, and James is the retelling of the Huck Finn story, but from Jim's point of view. And it's just absolutely brilliant piece of fiction. I've also been reading a guy I've just never gotten around to, um, and his name is Philip Kerr. And I'm just reading this whole Berlin Noir volume, which is actually three books in one. This is during pre-World War II in Germany, and he's got a private detective in Berlin, Bernie Gunther, who is just a trip in terms of his attitude and what he sees and his access to the growing Nazi party and their power in Germany. And it's brilliant writing, really, really enjoyable. So I mean, I've been reviewing books on my website for years and years and years. I like variety, and I try to skip around between nonfiction, mysteries, straight up fiction, whatever people say. You got to read this.
How does that type of like widely reading inform your writing?
Wow, that's, interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think ultimately, I think as a writer, you observe, um, what you can see the craft of what a writer is doing. Sometimes the book is so good you just want to immerse yourself in the story, and other times you kind of have your writer head on and you're sort of watching their technique. Um, I think ultimately, though, if you're really being honest with yourself as a writer, nothing that you're reading will change your style. If you're listening to your own voice and you realize there's so many other voices out there and there's so many different ways of going about telling a story, if you really trust your writing voice, that will come through and it will be your own. So you might pick up a technique or an idea, or a way of approaching a scene. You might say that's kind of interesting, but ultimately, when you sit down to write, all that's sort of in the background. It's just it has to. There's just too much. It'd be like picking up a guitar to write a song and having listened to music for 50 years. Something will come out that's your own, and it can't be, and it better not be a straight up steal. You can't do that.
Absolutely. Can you share some tips for writers that are looking to develop their voice?
There's really just one, and I think you know what it is. Just keep writing. You hear it's put so many different ways. Writers write. Um, that you hear about the fact that it might take a few books to really establish your voice. I found that to be very true for me. It took me a long time to get to a point where I felt like I could really say, I know when it's good or bad. I know when I've written a scene that works. I know when I've written developed a new character and put him or her on the page, and I feel like there's something there that is three-dimensional and that will work in the context of the story. Um, and I don't think, I mean, it's a rare writer who can just sit down for the first time and put together chapter one of whatever it's going to be and say that was really, really good. I know hundreds of writers around the country through mystery writers circles, through Rocky Mountain fiction writers, through various groups and conferences I've gone to. I have never heard anything other than just keep writing. And, you get in that habit. It's like being a songwriter or a visual artist or a dancer or whatever it might be, a beer maker, a mountain climber. You're gonna get better as you go along with just about everything. And and we're all still learning. We're all still striving.
Absolutely. I think it's something that we hear a lot in general as writers, but it always bears repeating because it's like when you're a kid, you're kind of fed this idea of there are great writers and they are far away and they just everything they write is perfect. And it's the truth of that is that you have to practice and anyone can really be a great writer if you put that time and if you put that effort in.
Make it a habit. Make it a habit. You'll be really surprised. There'll be a day, it might be 6 months after you start writing, or it might be 6 weeks after you start writing, it might be a couple years. And one day you're going to sit there and it will just feel so different because your ideas are here and they're coming out on the page in such a clean, clear way. And you'll recognize the energy is on the energy that's on the page. You'll recognize some originality, even just coming up with a cool sentence. One cool sentence a morning is such a great reward.
Mhm.
Um, so just keep at it and you'll be surprised. Yeah.
Well, this has just been such a fantastic conversation. Thank you for coming on the show again and talking with me. I loved hearing all about your process and all of these tips. This was really great.
Thank you.
I just have one more question, and that is, what do you have coming up?
Well, I've got to write a sequel to No Lie Lasts Forever. It's a two-book deal, but it's probably going to be three, and that's due in a few weeks. So I'm wrapping that up and quickly turning my mind to the third book. And my agent is sitting on a book he's trying to sell that's set in the world of rock and roll. So hopefully he can sell that soon as well. And other than that, just yeah, focusing on the rest of the series after the release of No Lie Lasts Forever.
That's very exciting. I hope everyone listening to this goes and checks out all of Mark's books. And I know that I will be staying tuned for the new ones, and I'm excited about this rock and roll one that's coming right up. And for Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
And I'm Mark Stevens.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The
The
end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.